The wedding dress that once made me feel like a princess now hangs in the back of my closet like a ghost of who I used to be. My name is Emma, and for 4 years I believed I was fundamentally broken. 4 years of being told I was repulsive, offensive, something to be tolerated rather than loved. 4 years of living in a house where I held my breath, apologized for existing, and wondered what was wrong with me that made my own husband recoil at my touch. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what if I told you that everything I believed about myself was a carefully constructed lie? What if the person who promised to love me in sickness and in health had been making me sick on purpose? What if the woman who welcomed me into her family with open arms had been plotting my destruction from day one? This is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who sleep beside you, the ones who claim to love you while slowly poisoning your soul. And this is how I turned their own weapons against them. I should have known something was wrong on our wedding night. The red flags were there, waving frantically, but I was so blinded by what I thought was love that I explained away every cruel word, every disgusted look, every moment when my new husband acted like I was something distasteful he had to endure. We had just returned to our new home in Riverside, a charming suburb outside Portland where the houses sat on tree-lined streets and neighbors still waved at each other from their front porches. It was supposed to be our dream home, the place where we would build our life together. Instead, it became my prison. I remember standing in our bedroom that first night, still wearing my going-away dress, watching Ryan fumble with his tie. He was handsome in that clean-cut way that mothers love, with sandy brown hair and green eyes that had once looked at me like I was everything he had ever wanted. But that night, those same eyes held something different. Something cold. When I moved closer to help him with the tie, he stepped back so quickly that I stumbled. The look on his face was unmistakable. Disgust. Pure, unfiltered revulsion, like I had just offered him something rotten. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart was already sinking, though I couldn't understand why. Ryan's jaw tightened. He turned away from me, loosening his tie with sharp, agitated movements. "Nothing's wrong, Emma. I'm just tired." But I could see the lie in the rigid set of his shoulders, in the way he kept his distance as I moved around the room. When I reached for his hand, he pulled away like my touch burned him. "Did I do something?" The words came out small and broken, and I hated how desperate I sounded. This was our wedding night. This was supposed to be the beginning of our happily ever after. Ryan finally turned to look at me, and what I saw in his expression made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was barely concealed disgust, like he was looking at something unpleasant that he couldn't quite bring himself to deal with. "You didn't do anything," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just, maybe you should shower. Freshen up." I had showered that morning. I had spent 2 hours getting ready with my bridesmaids, making sure every detail was perfect. I was wearing expensive perfume that had cost me half a week's salary, but something in his voice made me doubt myself, made me wonder if somehow, despite all my preparations, I had missed something fundamental. "Of course," I said quickly, grabbing my robe and practically running to the bathroom. I spent 45 minutes in that shower, scrubbing every inch of my skin until it was raw and red, washing my hair twice, using every expensive soap and body wash I owned. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a cloud of lavender and vanilla-scented steam, I felt confident that whatever had been wrong was fixed. But when I returned to the bedroom, Ryan was already under the covers, his back turned to me, pretending to be asleep. I slipped into bed beside him, my heart hammering against my ribs, and when I gently touched his shoulder, he flinched away from me like I had slapped him. "Ryan," I whispered into the darkness. "I'm sleeping, Emma. We'll talk in the morning." But morning came and went, and we never talked about it. Instead, Ryan developed a pattern of subtle cruelty that would define our marriage. The way he would wrinkle his nose when I entered a room. The exaggerated sigh when I sat down next to him on the couch. The way he would suddenly remember urgent errands whenever I suggested we spend time together. His mother Patricia noticed it too, or at least she claimed to notice it during her frequent visits to our home. Patricia was one of those women who managed to insult you while smiling, who could make you feel worthless with a perfectly polite comment. She had silver hair that she kept in an elegant bob, designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and a way of looking at me like I was a stain on her son's otherwise perfect life. "Emma, dear," she would say in that sweet, concerned voice that somehow always made me feel like I was being scolded, "have you considered seeing a doctor? Sometimes these things can be medical." These things. She never specified what these things were, but the implication was clear. There was something wrong with me. Something that made me unpleasant to be around. Something that explained why my own husband couldn't stand to touch me. Ryan would nod along with these conversations, his face a mask of patient suffering. "I've tried to bring it up gently," he would tell his mother, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "But you know how sensitive she is about criticism." Sensitive. That became his favorite word for me. Whenever I tried to discuss our problems, whenever I asked why he seemed to find my presence so objectionable, I was being sensitive. When I cried after particularly harsh comments about my appearance or habits, I was being overly emotional. When I suggested counseling, I was making a big deal out of nothing. The worst part was that I started to believe them. When two people you trust tell you that you're the problem, when they agree that there's something fundamentally wrong with you, it becomes easier to accept their version of reality than to question it. I began to see myself through their eyes, a burden, a source of discomfort, someone who should be grateful that anyone was willing to put up with her at all. I changed everything I could think of. I switched shampoos, soaps, deodorants, perfumes. I started showering twice a day, sometimes 3 times if Ryan seemed particularly distant. I bought expensive lotions and body sprays, trying every product that promised to make me more appealing, more pleasant to be around. I changed my diet, thinking maybe something I was eating was causing an odor I couldn't detect. I went to the dentist 3 times in 6 months, convinced that despite my careful oral hygiene routine, something must be wrong with my breath. Nothing worked. If anything, Ryan's reactions seemed to get worse. He started sleeping in the guest room, claiming I moved too much in my sleep. He would leave rooms shortly after I entered them, always with some excuse about phone calls or work. At dinner parties with friends, he would position himself across the room from me, and I would catch him making apologetic faces at other people, as if he was embarrassed by my presence. Patricia's visits became more frequent, and her comments became more pointed. She would bring me gifts, expensive soaps, perfumes, even books about personal hygiene and self-improvement. Always wrapped beautifully, always presented with a loving smile, always accompanied by some variation of, "I thought this might help, dear." The breaking point came during a family barbecue at Patricia's house in the hills overlooking the city. It was one of those perfect Oregon summer days, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of roses from her meticulously maintained garden. I had spent hours getting ready, trying a new perfume that had gotten rave reviews online, wearing a dress that I knew looked good on me. But the moment I walked into Patricia's backyard, I could feel it. The way conversations quieted slightly when I approached. The way people seemed to position themselves upwind from me. The way Ryan's Aunt Ellen kept touching her nose absently whenever I was nearby. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that my insecurities were making me paranoid. But then I overheard Patricia talking to her sister near the rose bushes, their voices low but not quite low enough. "I feel so sorry for Ryan," Patricia was saying. "He tries so hard to be supportive, but living with someone who has such poor hygiene must be exhausting." "Have you talked to her about it?" Ellen asked. "Oh, I've tried to be diplomatic. But she's very defensive about any kind of criticism. I think she knows there's a problem, but she's too proud to address it properly." I stood frozen behind the garden shed, my face burning with shame and confusion. Poor hygiene? I showered religiously, brushed my teeth multiple times a day, wore clean clothes, used deodorant and perfume and every product imaginable. What were they talking about? But then I heard Ryan's voice joining the conversation, and my heart shattered completely. I don't know what to do anymore, he said, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine despair. I've tried everything. I've bought her every product I can think of, suggested she see doctors, even hinted that maybe she should try a different approach to personal care. But nothing works, and I can't keep pretending it doesn't bother me. You're a saint for putting up with it, Ellen said softly. Most men would have given up by now. I love her, Ryan replied, and the worst part was that he actually sounded sincere. But I can't live like this forever. Something has to change. I stumbled away from that conversation feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. These weren't strangers talking about me, or enemies trying to hurt me. This was my husband, the man who had promised to love me for better or worse, discussing my supposed flaws with his family like I was some kind of unfortunate burden he had to bear. That night, I confronted him. I waited until we were alone in our bedroom, and then I asked him directly about what I had overheard. Ryan didn't deny it. Instead, he sat on the edge of our bed and looked at me with what seemed like genuine sadness. Emma, I didn't want you to hear that. But yes, we need to talk about this. Talk about what exactly? I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. About your hygiene issues. About the way it's affecting our marriage. The words hit me like a physical blow. What hygiene issues? I shower every day, sometimes twice. I brush my teeth constantly. I use deodorant and perfume and every product you can imagine. What am I missing? Ryan's expression was patient but tired, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. It's not about how often you shower, Emma. It's about... I don't know how to say this without hurting your feelings. Just say it. There's an odor. It's not overwhelming, but it's unpleasant, and it seems to be getting worse over time. I stared at him, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. What kind of odor? It's hard to describe. Sort of sweet, but in a cloying way, like something that's gone slightly off. And it's not just that. Sometimes your breath has this metallic smell, even right after you brush your teeth. I felt like I was going to be sick. Why didn't you tell me before? I tried to be subtle about it. The suggestions about different products, the hints about seeing a doctor. I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't pretend it doesn't affect me anymore. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to process what my husband had just told me. I got up 3 times to smell my own clothes, my own skin, trying to detect whatever it was that everyone else seemed to notice. I couldn't smell anything unusual, but I began to doubt my own senses. Maybe I had become nose-blind to my own odor. Maybe there really was something medically wrong with me that I couldn't detect. The next morning, I made an appointment with my doctor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I explained the situation as diplomatically as I could, asking if there were any medical conditions that could cause unpleasant body odors. Dr. Martinez was thorough and kind, running every test she could think of. Blood work, urine tests, bacterial cultures, hormone panels. Everything came back normal. I can't find any medical reason for what you're describing, she told me during my follow-up appointment. Your test results are all within normal ranges, and honestly, I haven't noticed any unusual odors during our appointments. I felt a moment of hope, but then doubt crept back in. Maybe you're just being polite? Dr. Martinez smiled gently. Emma, I'm a doctor. If there was a hygiene issue that could be addressed medically, I would tell you. Have you considered that this might be more of a relationship issue than a medical one? But I dismissed her suggestion. Ryan wouldn't lie to me about something like this. Neither would Patricia. If they said there was a problem, there had to be a problem, even if the doctors couldn't find it. So I kept trying. I researched obsessively, looking for solutions to problems I couldn't even properly identify. I tried elimination diets, thinking maybe certain foods were causing the issue. I bought expensive probiotics, thinking maybe my gut bacteria was out of balance. I even started taking chlorophyll supplements after reading online that they could help with internal odors. Nothing worked. If anything, Ryan seemed to grow more distant with each passing month. He started working late more often, taking weekend trips to visit friends, finding excuses to be away from home. When he was home, he treated me with the kind of polite detachment you might show to an unpleasant houseguest you couldn't wait to get rid of. The emotional distance was devastating, but the physical distance was worse. We hadn't been intimate since our wedding night, and now I understood why. How could I expect my husband to want to be close to me when my very presence seemed to repel him? I started avoiding social situations, declining invitations to parties and gatherings where I might make other people uncomfortable. I became hyper-aware of how people reacted when I entered a room, analyzing every facial expression for signs of disgust or discomfort. I started standing farther away from people during conversations, just in case. My confidence, which had never been particularly strong to begin with, crumbled completely. I began to see myself as Ryan and Patricia saw me, fundamentally flawed, unpleasant to be around. Lucky that anyone was willing to tolerate my presence at all. But even in my darkest moments, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered questions I was afraid to explore. Why could some people detect this supposed odor while others, including medical professionals, couldn't? Why did the problem seem to be getting worse, despite my increasingly desperate attempts to address it? And why did Ryan's reactions seem so theatrical sometimes, so perfectly timed to maximize my embarrassment and self-doubt? I pushed those questions away, telling myself I was just looking for someone else to blame for my own shortcomings. But they lingered, growing stronger with each passing day, until finally, I couldn't ignore them anymore. That's when I decided to find out the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. And what I discovered would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, and myself. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning in late September, when the Portland rain was drumming steadily against our bedroom windows, and the house felt more like a tomb than a home. Ryan had left early for a business trip to Seattle, kissing my forehead with the same mechanical affection he might show a pet before heading out the door. Patricia was supposed to come by later to check on me, as she always did when Ryan was away, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted alone. I had been lying in bed for an hour after Ryan left, staring at the ceiling and trying to summon the energy to face another day of self-doubt and isolation, when something occurred to me that made my heart race with a mixture of hope and terror. What if I conducted an experiment? What if I tried to figure out once and for all whether this mysterious odor actually existed? The idea was so simple, I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it before. I would spend the day interacting with people who had no reason to lie to me, people who didn't know Ryan or Patricia, people who had no investment in making me feel bad about myself. If the problem was real, they would notice it. If it wasn't, their reactions would tell me everything I needed to know. I got dressed carefully, using all my usual products but paying attention to every detail. I showered with my expensive body wash, shampooed and conditioned my hair, applied deodorant, lotion, and a light spritz of the perfume Ryan had given me for my birthday. I brushed my teeth twice, used mouthwash, and even chewed a mint before leaving the house. My first stop was the coffee shop downtown, where I used to go every morning, before my confidence had completely crumbled. The barista, a young woman named Jessie with bright purple hair and multiple piercings, had always been friendly to me in the past. If there was something unpleasant about my presence, surely she would notice. I approached the counter nervously, my heart hammering against my ribs as I prepared for any sign of disgust or discomfort. Jessie looked up from the espresso machine and broke into a genuine smile. "Oh my God, Emma! I haven't seen you in forever! How have you been?" She seemed genuinely happy to see me, leaning across the counter to chat as she prepared my usual order. We talked for several minutes about the weather, her new tattoo, and a book she was reading. At no point did she wrinkle her nose, step back, or show any sign that she found my presence unpleasant. When I left, she called out, "Don't be a stranger." "It's so good to see you again." My second test was at the grocery store, where I deliberately chose the checkout line with the chattiest cashier, an older man named Frank who had been working there for decades. Frank had always been one of those people who treated every customer like an old friend, asking about families and sharing stories about his grandchildren. As he rang up my items, Frank was as warm and talkative as ever. He stood close enough to hand me my receipt, smiled broadly throughout our conversation, and even leaned in slightly when he told me a joke about the weather. If there had been any unpleasant odor, Frank would have been close enough to notice, and his body language showed no signs of discomfort. For my third test, I went to the library where I had volunteered before my marriage consumed all my energy and confidence. I spent 2 hours shelving books alongside Mrs. Chen, an elderly librarian who was known for her sharp tongue and lack of filter. If anyone would have commented on an unpleasant smell, it would have been Mrs. Chen. Instead, she seemed delighted to have my help and chatted easily about her recent vacation to visit her daughter in San Francisco. By the time I returned home, I was feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: doubt about Ryan's version of reality. 3 different people in 3 different environments had shown no signs of noticing any problematic odors. They had all seemed genuinely happy to interact with me, standing at normal conversational distances, showing no signs of discomfort or disgust. But as I pulled into our driveway and saw Patricia's silver Mercedes already parked outside, my brief moment of confidence began to waver. Maybe I was just desperate to believe that the problem didn't exist. Maybe I was reading too much into normal politeness. Maybe the people I had encountered were just too kind to say anything. Patricia was waiting in the kitchen when I walked through the front door, sitting at our breakfast table with a cup of tea and that particular expression she wore when she was preparing to deliver unwelcome advice. She had let herself in with the spare key Ryan had given her, a boundary violation that had bothered me for years but which I had never felt empowered to challenge. "There you are, dear," she said, rising to greet me with air kisses that carefully avoided actual contact. I was beginning to worry. "Ryan mentioned you might be feeling a bit under the weather." Ryan hadn't mentioned any such thing, but I had learned not to challenge Patricia's creative interpretations of conversations. Instead, I smiled politely and moved to put away the groceries I had bought, trying to gauge her reaction to my presence. Patricia followed me around the kitchen as I unpacked bags, maintaining a running commentary about the weather, her book club, and her concerns about my well-being. But I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. She was maintaining a very specific distance from me, always staying just far enough away that we couldn't accidentally brush against each other, but close enough that her behavior wouldn't seem obviously avoidant. "You know, Emma," she said as I put milk in the refrigerator, "I've been thinking about our conversation last week about trying some new wellness approaches. I have a friend who swears by this particular line of products." She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out a gift bag tied with an elegant ribbon. "I thought you might like to try them." I accepted the bag with the appropriate expressions of gratitude, though my stomach clenched with familiar shame. Inside were expensive-looking bottles of body wash, shampoo, and something called a pH balancing spray that promised to address various feminine hygiene concerns. "How thoughtful," I managed, though the gifts felt like accusations wrapped in pretty packaging. Patricia beamed at me with what seemed like genuine affection. "I just want you to feel your best, sweetheart. You know how much Ryan loves you, and I think he just wants you to be confident and comfortable in your own skin." As she spoke, I found myself analyzing her words in a way I never had before. "How much Ryan loves you." Present tense, but delivered in a tone that suggested his love was somehow conditional on my ability to fix whatever was wrong with me. "I think he just wants you to be confident." Not, "he wants you to be happy," or "he accepts you as you are," but specifically that he wanted me to be confident. As if my lack of confidence was the real problem. After Patricia left, I sat alone in the kitchen, holding the bag of products and trying to make sense of my conflicting experiences. The strangers I had encountered that day had shown no signs of detecting any problematic odors. But here was my mother-in-law, someone who claimed to love me, once again suggesting that I needed to fix something fundamental about myself. I decided to call my sister Lauren, who lived in Vancouver, and had always been brutally honest with me about everything from bad haircuts to questionable boyfriends. If anyone would tell me the truth about whether I had hygiene issues, it would be Lauren. "Emma!" Lauren's voice was bright with surprise when she answered the phone. "This is such a nice surprise. How are things going?" We chatted for a few minutes about her job and her new apartment before I worked up the courage to broach the subject that was consuming my thoughts. "Lauren, can I ask you something that might sound weird?" "Shoot." "When we've been together recently, Have you ever noticed any kind of unpleasant smell around me, like body odor or bad breath or anything like that? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What kind of question is that, Em? Of course not. Why would you even ask me something like that? Ryan and his mother have mentioned that I might have some hygiene issues, and I wanted to get an outside perspective. Lauren's tone sharpened immediately. They said what? Emma, that's ridiculous. You're one of the most hygienic people I know. You always have been, even when we were kids. What exactly are they claiming is wrong? I explained the situation as objectively as I could, describing Ryan's complaints about odors that I couldn't detect, and Patricia's increasingly frequent gifts of hygiene products. As I spoke, I could hear Lauren's breathing growing more agitated. Emma, this is insane, she said when I finished. I was just with you 2 weeks ago when you came up for Mom's birthday. We spent the entire day together, including a 3-hour car ride. Trust me, if you had any kind of hygiene problem, I would have noticed. And I definitely would have said something, because that's the kind of sister I am. But why would Ryan lie about something like that? I don't know, but I think you need to start asking yourself some harder questions about your marriage. This doesn't sound like a hygiene problem, Em. This sounds like psychological manipulation. After I hung up with Lauren, I sat in the growing darkness of our living room, turning her words over in my mind. Psychological manipulation. The phrase felt both foreign and familiar, like something I had read about happening to other people but never considered in relation to my own life. I thought about the timeline of my supposed hygiene problems. They had started on our wedding night and had allegedly gotten progressively worse over the past 4 years. But I had always been conscientious about personal care, even obsessively so since Ryan's first complaints. If anything, I was more hygienic now than I had ever been in my life. I also thought about the pattern of people who could supposedly detect these odors versus those who couldn't. Ryan and Patricia always noticed them. Ryan's family members seemed to notice them at gatherings. But my coworkers had never mentioned anything. My friends had never said anything. Medical professionals had found nothing wrong. Complete strangers showed no signs of discomfort around me. The more I analyzed the situation, the more a terrible possibility began to take shape in my mind. What if Ryan and Patricia were lying? What if they were deliberately trying to make me believe I was disgusting in order to control me, to keep me isolated and dependent on their version of reality? The idea seemed so monstrous that I initially dismissed it. Why would anyone do such a thing? What could they possibly gain from systematically destroying my self-esteem? But as I sat there in the darkness, other pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Ryan had always been controlling, though I had rationalized his behavior as caring or protective. He didn't like me to go out with friends without him. He had opinions about my clothes, my hair, my job, my hobbies. He had gradually isolated me from most of my social connections, always with reasonable-sounding explanations about scheduling conflicts or his discomfort with certain people. Patricia had been instrumental in this isolation, always taking Ryan's side in any disagreement and subtly undermining my confidence in my own judgment. She would make comments about my career choices, my decorating decisions, my cooking, always framed as helpful suggestions but delivered in ways that made me question my own competence. Together, they had created an environment where I had learned to doubt my own perceptions and defer to their judgment on almost everything. The supposed hygiene problems were just the latest and most effective weapon in a campaign designed to make me feel worthless and grateful for their tolerance. But I still needed proof. I needed to know for certain whether my growing suspicions were justified, or whether I was just a desperate woman looking for someone else to blame for her own shortcomings. That's when I remembered the small digital recorder I used for work meetings. It was voice-activated and could run for hours on a single battery charge. If Ryan and Patricia were really conspiring against me, they might reveal their true feelings when they thought I wasn't around to hear them. The plan that began forming in my mind was simple, but risky. When Ryan returned from his business trip, I would find a way to record their private conversations. If they were genuinely concerned about my hygiene issues, Their private discussions would reflect that concern. But if they were deliberately manipulating me, they might let their guard down when they thought I couldn't hear them. I spent the rest of the evening researching the legal implications of recording conversations in Oregon. I learned that the state had a one-party consent law, which meant I could legally record conversations that I was a party to. But recording conversations between other people without their knowledge was more complicated. I would have to be careful about how I gathered evidence. The next morning, I tested the recorder by leaving it running in the kitchen while I took a shower. When I played back the recording, I could clearly hear the sounds of the house settling, the refrigerator humming, and even the neighbor's dog barking outside. The audio quality was excellent, and the device was small enough to hide easily. Ryan returned from Seattle on Thursday evening, bringing with him the usual gifts that felt more like peace offerings than expressions of love. Expensive chocolates I would feel guilty eating, a silk scarf that would hang unworn in my closet, a novel by an author he knew I didn't particularly enjoy. "How was your time with Mom?" he asked as we sat down to the dinner I had prepared, his tone carefully neutral. "Fine," I replied, watching his face for any telltale expressions. "She brought me some new products to try." Ryan's face brightened slightly, the first genuine emotion I had seen from him in weeks. "That was thoughtful of her. She really cares about you, you know." "I know," I said, though I was beginning to question whether Patricia's version of caring was actually love or something much more sinister. Over the next few days, I looked for opportunities to test my recording plan, but Ryan and Patricia seemed to be more careful about their private conversations. They would speak in low voices when they thought I was out of earshot, but they never said anything particularly revealing when I was close enough to record. My breakthrough came the following Tuesday, when Patricia called to invite us to dinner at her house. She mentioned that Ryan's Uncle Mark would be visiting from California, and she wanted to have a family gathering to celebrate his visit. "I'll make my famous pot roast," she told Ryan over speakerphone while I pretended to read a magazine at the kitchen table. "And maybe Emma could bring one of her nice salads." The way she said nice salads made it clear that she considered my culinary contributions adequate but unremarkable, another small dig disguised as a compliment. But I seized on the opportunity her invitation presented. "Actually," I said, looking up from my magazine, "I have a work deadline that night. Why don't you two go ahead without me? I know how much you enjoy your family time." Ryan and Patricia exchanged a look that I pretended not to notice, a quick glance that seemed to communicate something significant. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Ryan asked, but I could hear the relief in his voice. "Uncle Mark always asks about you." "I'm sure. Besides, it might be nice for you to have some time with your family without having to worry about, well, you know." I let the implication hang in the air, suggesting that my presence might be socially awkward due to my supposed hygiene issues. Both Ryan and Patricia immediately protested that they wanted me there, but their protests felt scripted and insincere. That evening, I kissed Ryan goodbye and wished him a lovely time at his mother's house. Then I waited exactly 30 minutes before driving to Patricia's neighborhood and parking around the corner from her house, close enough to see Ryan's car in the driveway but far enough away to avoid detection. I had brought the digital recorder, a pair of noise-canceling headphones, and a thermos of coffee. My plan was to wait until I was sure they were deep in conversation, then approach the house and find a way to record whatever they were saying when they thought I was safely at home, working on my fictional deadline. Patricia's house was a sprawling ranch-style home set back from the street behind a perfectly manicured lawn and elaborate flower gardens. The living room windows faced the backyard, but the kitchen windows looked out toward the street, and I could see the warm glow of lights and the shadows of people moving around inside. After watching for an hour and building up my courage, I crept closer to the house, staying in the shadows of the large oak trees that lined Patricia's property. The kitchen window was cracked open slightly to let in the cool evening air, and I could hear the murmur of voices coming from inside. I positioned myself beneath the window, my heart racing so fast I was afraid they might hear it, and activated the recorder. For several minutes I could only make out fragments of conversation about Uncle Mark's flight and Patricia's plans for redecorating her guest bathroom. But then the conversation shifted, and I heard my name spoken in a tone that made my blood run cold. "I have to admit, I'm relieved Emma decided not to come tonight," Patricia was saying. "It's so much more relaxing when we don't have to deal with her constant need for reassurance." "Tell me about it," Ryan replied. his voice carrying a note of exasperation I had never heard when he spoke to me directly. Sometimes I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own house, trying to manage her feelings about every little thing. How are the new products working? Patricia asked. The ones I brought her last week? Like a charm. She's been using them religiously, which means she's focused on fixing herself instead of questioning why she needs fixing in the first place. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The casual cruelty in Ryan's voice, the calculated nature of Patricia's concern, the clear indication that they were actively working to undermine my confidence. It was worse than anything I had imagined. But they weren't finished. I still think we need to be more aggressive, Patricia continued. She's starting to push back a little bit, asking more questions. Last week she mentioned seeing a doctor again, and that could be problematic if she gets the wrong kind of validation. What do you suggest? Maybe it's time to involve some of your friends. If more people start noticing her supposed problems, she'll be less likely to doubt the narrative we've established. Ryan was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of silverware against plates as they continued eating. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful and calculating. Michael and Sarah are having that barbecue next weekend. If we could get a few people there to make subtle comments about Emma seeming unwell or needing to take better care of herself, it might reinforce the message without seeming too obvious. Brilliant, Patricia said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. You really are my clever boy. Emma's so desperate for approval that even gentle suggestions from strangers will devastate her. I crouched beneath that window, the recorder clutched in my shaking hands, listening to the two people I had trusted most in the world discuss the systematic destruction of my self-esteem like they were planning a dinner party. They weren't concerned about my well-being. They weren't trying to help me address real problems. They were deliberately creating problems that didn't exist in order to control and manipulate me. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering details of their manipulation that made me feel sick to my stomach. They discussed which of my remaining friendships they wanted to target next, how to isolate me further from my family, and even how to undermine my confidence at work by suggesting that my supposed hygiene issues might be affecting my professional relationships. By the time I crept back to my car, I had over an hour of recorded evidence of their conspiracy. As I drove home through the dark Portland streets, my mind was reeling with the magnitude of their betrayal. But beneath the hurt and shock, something else was growing. A cold, determined anger that would fuel everything I did next. They thought they were so clever, so careful in their manipulation. They had spent 4 years systematically destroying my confidence and isolating me from anyone who might offer a different perspective on reality. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated my intelligence and my capacity to fight back. As I pulled into our driveway and saw the dark windows of the house that had become my prison, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I wasn't going to confront them directly. I wasn't going to give them the opportunity to gaslight me further or to adjust their tactics in response to my knowledge of their plan. Instead, I was going to beat them at their own game. I was going to use their weapons against them, and I was going to make sure that when the truth finally came to light, they would have no choice but to face the consequences of what they had done to me. Armed with the devastating recording of Ryan and Patricia's conversation, I spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled fury, planning my response with the same meticulous attention to detail they had used to destroy my confidence. The difference was that my plan would expose the truth rather than bury it, and justice rather than manipulation would be my ultimate goal. The first thing I did was make multiple copies of the recording, storing them in different locations and formats. I uploaded encrypted versions to secure cloud storage, burned copies onto CDs that I hid in various places throughout the house, and even emailed a copy to myself using a secure email service. I wasn't going to risk losing the only concrete evidence I had of their conspiracy. Next, I began documenting everything I could remember about their pattern of manipulation over the past 4 years. I created a detailed timeline of incidents, recording not just what had been said, but when, where, and who had been present. I noted patterns in their behavior, the escalation of their tactics, and the systematic way they had isolated me from friends and family who might have offered different perspectives. The documentation process was emotionally brutal. Reviewing 4 years of psychological abuse forced me to confront how thoroughly they had manipulated my reality, and how completely I had internalized their version of events. There were moments when I had to stop writing because the anger threatened to overwhelm my ability to think strategically, but I pressed on because I knew that documentation would be crucial for what I planned to do next. I wasn't just going to expose their lies. I was going to make sure that everyone who had been part of their conspiracy understood exactly what they had participated in. The barbecue at Michael and Sarah's house that Patricia had mentioned was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. According to their recorded conversation, they planned to use the gathering to expand their manipulation campaign, enlisting Ryan's friends to make subtle comments that would further undermine my confidence. I decided that this barbecue would be the perfect venue for my counterattack. On Wednesday morning, while Ryan was at work, I drove to a small electronics store in a different part of town and purchased additional recording equipment. I bought tiny wireless microphones that could be hidden in clothing, a more sophisticated digital recorder with extended battery life, and even a small camera that could be concealed in a handbag or pocket. The saleswoman, a tech-savvy college student named Amanda, helped me understand how to use the equipment effectively. When she asked what I needed it for, I told her I was a journalist working on an investigative piece about workplace harassment. The lie came easily, probably because it wasn't that far from the truth. Thursday evening, Ryan returned from work in an unusually good mood, whistling as he hung up his jacket and sorted through the mail. His cheerfulness felt like sandpaper against my nerves, knowing what I now knew about his true feelings toward me. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, kissing my forehead with the same mechanical affection he had shown for months. "Fine," I replied, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "How was the dinner at your mother's the other night?" "I never heard how it went." Ryan's expression brightened further. "It was great. Uncle Mark was in top form, telling stories about his adventures in Costa Rica. Mom made her famous pot roast, and we all missed having you there." The ease with which he lied was breathtaking. I had heard him complaining about having to manage my feelings and expressing relief at my absence, but now he was painting a picture of a loving family gathering where I had been sorely missed. "That's nice," I said. "I'm looking forward to Michael and Sarah's barbecue on Saturday. It's been a while since we've socialized with your friends." Something flickered across Ryan's face, so quickly I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching carefully. Surprise, maybe, or concern. He recovered quickly, but I had seen enough to confirm that the barbecue was indeed significant to their plans. "Right, the barbecue. Should be fun. Sarah mentioned she's trying some new recipes." Friday morning, I called in sick to work, claiming a stomach bug that would keep me home for the day. Instead of resting, I spent the morning visiting my lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in family law and had been recommended by my sister Lauren. I had decided that whatever happened at the barbecue, I wanted to be prepared for the legal implications of my marriage ending. If Ryan and Patricia were willing to manipulate me this extensively, they would certainly try to manipulate any divorce proceedings as well. Rebecca listened carefully as I explained the situation, playing portions of the recorded conversation and showing her my documentation of their manipulation tactics. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she absorbed the scope of what I was describing. "This is one of the most systematic cases of psychological abuse I've encountered," she said when I finished. "The fact that they've been actively conspiring to undermine your mental health could be relevant to divorce proceedings, particularly if there are financial assets involved." We discussed my options, including the possibility of pursuing legal action beyond just divorce. Rebecca explained that while psychological abuse was harder to prosecute than physical abuse, the evidence I had gathered could potentially support claims of intentional infliction of emotional distress. "The key," she said, "is going to be demonstrating the systematic nature of their behavior and the damage it has caused. Do you have any evidence of how their manipulation has affected your life beyond just your emotional well-being?" I thought about the opportunities I had missed because of my eroded confidence, the friendships I had abandoned, the career advancement I had avoided because I no longer trusted my own competence. The financial cost of their manipulation was actually quite substantial when I considered all the ways their actions had limited my potential. I think I can document those impacts, I told her, but I'm not ready to file anything yet. I want to gather more evidence first. Rebecca nodded approvingly. Smart. The more documentation you have, the stronger your position will be. But be careful about how you gather that evidence. Don't do anything that could be construed as harassment or stalking. That afternoon, I practiced using the recording equipment I had purchased, testing different ways to conceal the microphones and cameras while still capturing clear audio and video. I rehearsed natural-seeming movements that would position the devices optimally, and I practiced maintaining normal conversation while mentally noting important details for later documentation. The technology was more sophisticated than I had expected, and by evening I felt confident that I could capture high-quality evidence of whatever Ryan and Patricia planned to do at the barbecue. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Oregon weather that threatened to drive the barbecue indoors. I found myself hoping for sunshine, not because I particularly wanted to attend an outdoor party, but because I knew my recording equipment would work better in the open air of a backyard than in the confined spaces of a house. As if the universe were conspiring to help me, the clouds began to break up around noon, and by the time we needed to leave for Michael and Sarah's house, weak sunlight was filtering through the remaining overcast. I dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing clothes that would conceal the tiny microphone I had taped to my chest and the small camera I had hidden in the decorative clasp of my handbag. I looked like any other suburban wife heading to a casual social gathering, but I felt like a spy preparing for a crucial mission. Ryan seemed unusually solicitous during the drive to Michael and Sarah's house, asking if I was feeling well and commenting on how nice I looked. His sudden attention felt calculated rather than genuine, and I wondered if it was part of whatever performance he and Patricia had planned. You know, he said as we pulled into the driveway of Michael and Sarah's modern farmhouse-style home, I'm really glad we're doing this. I feel like we've been a bit isolated lately, and it'll be good to spend time with friends. The irony of his comment was staggering. They had systematically isolated me from most of my social connections, and now he was framing their manipulation as something that had simply happened to us, rather than something they had deliberately orchestrated. Michael and Sarah's backyard was beautifully decorated with string lights and colorful bunting, and about 20 people were already mingling around the deck and patio area. I recognized most of them as longtime friends of Ryan's, people I had known for years but never felt particularly close to. Sarah greeted us at the back gate with enthusiastic hugs and comments about how long it had been since she'd seen us. She was one of those effortlessly stylish women who always seemed to have everything together, from her perfectly highlighted hair to her designer casual wear that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Emma, you look wonderful, she said, though I noticed her eyes didn't quite meet mine as she spoke. Come get something to drink. Michael has been experimenting with craft cocktails. As we made our way toward the beverage station, I activated the recording equipment and began to pay careful attention to the reactions of the people around us. Most seemed genuinely pleased to see us, offering warm greetings and engaging in normal small talk about work, travel plans, and mutual acquaintances. But I noticed that Patricia was already there, holding court near the outdoor kitchen where Michael was grilling, and she had positioned herself with a clear view of the entire party. When she saw us arrive, her face lit up with what seemed like genuine pleasure, but I now recognized it as the same calculated expression she used whenever she was preparing to manipulate a situation. Ryan! Emma! She called out, approaching us with arms outstretched for hugs. I'm so glad you could make it. Emma, dear, you're looking much better than when I saw you last week. The comment was perfectly crafted to seem supportive, while actually implying that I had been looking unwell previously. Several people nearby heard the remark and glanced at me with expressions that seemed to confirm Patricia's assessment. Over the next hour, I began to notice a pattern that confirmed everything I had heard in their recorded conversation. Various friends of Ryan's made casual comments that seemed designed to undermine my confidence, while appearing to be expressions of concern or support. David, one of Ryan's college friends, mentioned that I seemed more energetic than usual, implying that I was typically lethargic or unwell. His wife Jennifer complimented my outfit but added that the colors were very flattering for your complexion. suggesting that my natural coloring was somehow problematic. Most insidiously, several people made comments about hygiene or personal care that seemed designed to make me self-conscious. Tom, who worked with Ryan, mentioned that he had recently discovered a new brand of natural deodorant that was, quote, life-changing for people with sensitive skin. Lisa, Sarah's sister, launched into an unprompted discussion of her dermatologist's recommendations for managing, quote, challenging body chemistry. Each comment was subtle enough that it could be dismissed as normal conversation, but the cumulative effect was unmistakable. They were trying to make me feel self-conscious about my appearance and hygiene, without directly stating that there was anything wrong with me. What made it even more devastating was that these were people I had considered friends, people who had attended our wedding and shared meals at our table. The realization that Ryan and Patricia had recruited them into their manipulation campaign felt like a betrayal on top of a betrayal. But I maintained my composure, responding to each comment with appropriate expressions of interest or gratitude, while internally cataloging every detail for my documentation. The recording equipment was capturing everything, and I was confident that when played back, the pattern of manipulation would be undeniable. The turning point came when Patricia suggested that we all move inside to see Sarah's recent kitchen renovation. As we toured the beautiful space with its marble countertops and custom cabinetry, I found myself standing near the large island, while others admired the pendant lighting and professional-grade appliances. Patricia positioned herself on the opposite side of the island, and I noticed her making subtle gestures that seemed to be signals to other people in the room. When she touched her nose delicately, Jennifer moved slightly upwind from me. When she raised her eyebrows meaningfully at Tom, he suggested opening a window for, quote, better air circulation. It was like watching a choreographed performance, and I realized that they had probably rehearsed these tactics before. The coordination was too smooth, too natural seeming to be spontaneous. That's when I decided to test my theory. This kitchen is absolutely gorgeous, I said, moving closer to Sarah and speaking in a voice just loud enough for several people to hear. The layout is so functional. I've been thinking about renovating our kitchen, but Ryan thinks it might be too expensive right now. It was a perfectly normal comment, the kind of casual conversation that happens at every social gathering. But I watched carefully to see how Ryan would respond, knowing that he typically took any opportunity to diminish my ideas or suggestions in public. Sure enough, Ryan's face took on that patient, slightly condescending expression I knew so well. Well, Emma tends to have pretty ambitious ideas about home improvement, he said with a chuckle that invited others to share in his amusement at my supposed impracticality. She sees something on Pinterest and suddenly we need to renovate the entire house. Several people laughed politely, but I noticed that the laughter seemed forced, as if they weren't quite comfortable with Ryan's dismissive tone but felt obligated to support him. Patricia immediately chimed in with what seemed like gentle support for me but was actually another manipulation tactic. Oh, Emma has wonderful taste, she said warmly. She just needs to learn to balance her creative vision with practical considerations. It's something that comes with experience. The implication was clear. I was creative but impractical, visionary but naive, someone who needed guidance from more experienced and realistic people like Patricia and Ryan. I decided to push the test further. You're probably right, I said, adopting the self-deprecating tone I had learned to use whenever my ideas were dismissed. I do tend to get carried away with decorating ideas. Maybe I should start smaller, with just updating some accessories or changing the paint colors. What happened next confirmed everything I had suspected about their manipulation tactics. Multiple people in the room immediately began offering advice about how I could implement small changes effectively, but their suggestions were subtly undermining. Paint can be tricky, said Michael. You really need to consider how colors will look in different lighting conditions. Maybe start with just one accent wall. Accessories are definitely the way to go, added Lisa, though you have to be careful not to overdo it. Sometimes less is more, especially in smaller spaces. Each piece of advice contained an implicit criticism or limitation, designed to make me feel incapable of making good decisions on my own. They were treating me like a child who needed constant guidance and supervision, and I realized that this was probably how they had been conditioned to interact with me over the years. The most chilling moment came when I excused myself to use the bathroom and accidentally overheard a conversation between Patricia and Jennifer in the hallway outside the powder room. "She seems to be doing better tonight," Jennifer was saying in a low voice. "Appearances can be deceiving," Patricia replied. "Ryan and I are still very concerned about her. She's been struggling with some personal issues that affect her confidence and her ability to take care of herself properly. That must be so difficult for Ryan. He's been incredibly patient, but it's taking a toll on him. He loves her so much, but watching someone you care about struggle with basic self-care is heartbreaking." I stood frozen in the bathroom, listening to Patricia paint a picture of me as a pitiable figure who was failing at the most fundamental aspects of adult life. She was positioning herself and Ryan as long-suffering caregivers, and Jennifer was responding with exactly the kind of sympathetic support Patricia was seeking. When I emerged from the bathroom, both women immediately shifted to bright, artificial smiles and began discussing Sarah's choice of bathroom fixtures, as if their previous conversation had never happened. The rest of the evening continued in the same vein, with various combinations of people making comments designed to undermine my confidence while Ryan and Patricia orchestrated the interactions with subtle signals and strategic positioning. By the time we said our goodbyes and headed home, I felt like I had attended a masterclass in psychological manipulation. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of having outmaneuvered my opponents. They thought they were so clever, so subtle in their tactics. But I had recorded every word, captured every gesture, documented every moment of their carefully choreographed campaign to destroy my self-esteem. During the drive home, Ryan seemed pleased with how the evening had gone. He made casual comments about how much fun it had been to see everyone, and how nice it was that people were so concerned about my well-being. "Jennifer mentioned that you seemed like you were feeling better lately," he said as we pulled into our driveway. "I think all those new products Mom suggested are really helping." The audacity of his statement was breathtaking. He was literally rewriting the evening's events in real time, transforming a coordinated attack on my self-esteem into evidence of people's care and concern for my welfare. But I just smiled and agreed that it had been a lovely evening, because I knew that very soon Ryan's ability to control the narrative would come to an end. That night, while Ryan slept soundly beside me, I transferred all the recordings from the barbecue to my secure storage locations and began transcribing the most damaging conversations. The evidence I had gathered was even more comprehensive than I had hoped, and I knew it would be impossible for Ryan or Patricia to deny or explain away their systematic campaign of manipulation. As I worked by the light of my laptop screen, I felt a sense of calm determination that I hadn't experienced in years. For so long I had been reactive, always responding to their attacks, always on the defensive, always trying to fix problems that didn't actually exist. But now I was in control. Now I had the power to expose the truth and force them to face the consequences of what they had done to me. And I was going to use that power strategically, methodically, and devastatingly. The war they had started was about to end, but not in the way they had planned. Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that made Portland feel like the most beautiful place on earth. I woke early, before Ryan stirred, and lay in bed listening to the distant sound of church bells while mentally rehearsing the conversation that would change everything. Today was the day I would confront them with the truth, but not in the way they expected. I had spent most of Saturday night finalizing my strategy, and I knew exactly how this needed to unfold. The key was timing and presentation. I needed to control the narrative from the very beginning, to prevent them from spinning or deflecting or turning the situation around on me the way they had done so many times before. Ryan emerged from the bathroom around 9, already dressed for what he assumed would be a normal Sunday. He had mentioned wanting to visit his mother after brunch, which fit perfectly into my plans. I needed both of them present for what was about to happen. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead with that familiar mechanical affection. "How are you feeling today?" "Actually, I'm feeling better than I have in years," I replied, and for the first time in our marriage, I meant it completely. Something in my tone must have caught his attention. because he paused in the middle of adjusting his watch and looked at me more carefully. That's great to hear. You seemed to enjoy yourself at the barbecue yesterday. I did. It was very enlightening. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't pursue the comment. Instead, he suggested we grab breakfast at the little cafe downtown before heading to Patricia's house. I agreed readily, knowing that what I had planned would work better in the familiar territory of Patricia's perfectly appointed living room. During breakfast, I observed Ryan with the detached fascination of a scientist studying a specimen. Now that I knew the truth about his feelings toward me, every gesture felt like a performance. The way he buttered my toast and slid it across the table with a smile. The way he asked about my plans for the week while checking his phone. The way he paid the check with a flourish, making sure the waitress saw what a generous and attentive husband he was. It was all theater, every moment of it, designed to maintain the illusion that he was a loving spouse tolerating a difficult wife, rather than a manipulative abuser systematically destroying someone's sense of self-worth. When we arrived at Patricia's house, she greeted us at the door wearing a flowing silk blouse and perfectly applied makeup despite the early hour. Her smile was warm and welcoming, but I now recognized it as the same calculated expression she used whenever she was preparing to extract information or plant seeds of doubt. Emma, darling, you look wonderful this morning. That color is so flattering on you. The compliment was perfectly crafted to seem supportive, while implying that I didn't usually look wonderful, and that most colors were not flattering on me. A year ago, such a comment would have made me question my clothing choices and spend the rest of the day feeling self-conscious about my appearance. Today, it simply confirmed that Patricia was operating according to her usual script. We settled into Patricia's immaculate living room, where fresh flowers adorned every surface, and the morning light filtered through expensive curtains onto furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. Patricia served coffee in delicate china cups while making small talk about the weather and her plans for redecorating the guest bedroom. I waited until we were all seated and comfortable before I pulled out my phone and set it on the coffee table between us. I wanted to talk to you both about something important, I said, keeping my voice calm and level. I've made some discoveries recently that I think we need to discuss. Ryan and Patricia exchanged one of their quick glances, the kind of silent communication that had once made me feel excluded, but now simply confirmed their conspiracy. Of course, sweetheart, Ryan said, leaning forward with an expression of concerned attention. What's on your mind? Well, I've been doing some research into my supposed hygiene problems, and I've learned some very interesting things. Patricia's teacup paused halfway to her lips, and I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not quite panic, but definitely alertness. What kind of research? She asked carefully. Instead of answering directly, I touched the screen of my phone and played the first recording I had prepared. Patricia's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakably hers. The conditioning spray is working perfectly. She really believes she smells terrible now. The effect was immediate and devastating. Patricia's face went completely white, and she set down her teacup with hands that were suddenly trembling. Ryan's mouth fell open, and for the first time in our marriage, he was completely speechless. I let the recording play for another 30 seconds, just long enough for them to hear Ryan's enthusiastic participation in their plan to manipulate me, before I paused it and looked at both of them with a calm smile. Would you like to hear more? I have hours of material. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia and Ryan stared at me as if I had transformed into someone they didn't recognize, which I supposed was exactly what had happened. The meek, insecure woman they had spent years molding was gone, replaced by someone who had caught them in their own web of lies. Ryan was the first to recover, and his response was exactly what I had expected. Instead of shame or remorse, his face flushed with anger. You recorded us? That's illegal, Emma. You can't just spy on people in their private conversations. Actually, Oregon is a one-party consent state for recordings, and I was present during several of these conversations. But I'm glad to see that your first concern is the legality of my evidence, rather than the content of what you were saying. Patricia finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Emma, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You're taking things out of context. I touched my phone screen again and played a different clip, this one from the barbecue just yesterday. Patricia's voice filled the room again. She's been struggling with some personal issues that affect her confidence and her ability to take care of herself properly. What context would make that acceptable? I asked when the clip ended. What context would justify you telling our friends that I'm struggling with basic self-care, when you know perfectly well that you've been manufacturing evidence to make me believe I have hygiene problems? Ryan tried a different approach, his voice taking on the patient, condescending tone he used whenever he wanted to make me feel like I was overreacting. Emma, I think you're blowing this out of proportion. Mom and I have always been concerned about your well-being, and maybe we didn't handle it in the best way, but our intentions were good. Your intentions were good? I repeated, letting disbelief color my voice. Ryan, I have recordings of you laughing about how you can barely stand to be in the same room with me. I have documentation of a systematic campaign to destroy my self-esteem. What part of that reflects good intentions? I played another clip, this one featuring Ryan's voice, expressing relief that I hadn't attended the family dinner, and his eagerness to involve more people in their manipulation campaign. When it ended, he was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Patricia made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. Emma, dear, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. This paranoid thinking, these elaborate theories about conspiracies. This isn't healthy behavior. Maybe we should call Dr. Martinez and have you evaluated. The suggestion that I was mentally unstable was so predictable that I almost laughed. Of course she would try to turn my discovery of their abuse into evidence of my own psychological problems. It was the same gaslighting technique they had used for years, just more blatant. Actually, I did speak with a professional, I said calmly. I consulted with an attorney who specializes in psychological abuse cases. She was very interested in the evidence I've gathered. That got their attention. Ryan's head snapped up, and Patricia's face went even paler. An attorney? Ryan asked, his voice tight with something that might have been fear. Rebecca Martinez. She's handled several high-profile cases involving systematic psychological manipulation. She thinks what you've done to me could qualify as intentional infliction of emotional distress, which is a civil tort that can result in significant financial damages. I pulled out a folder I had prepared and set it on the coffee table next to my phone. I've also documented the financial impact of your manipulation, the therapy sessions I needed because you convinced me I was fundamentally flawed, the medical tests I underwent trying to find non-existent problems, the career opportunities I declined because you destroyed my confidence, the social events I avoided because you made me believe I was unpleasant to be around. It adds up to quite a substantial sum. Patricia was shaking her head frantically. You can't be serious about this, Emma. We're family. Families work through their problems together. They don't sue each other. You're absolutely right that families work through problems together. I agreed. But what you did to me wasn't a family problem. It was a calculated campaign of abuse. And the moment you decided to involve Ryan's friends in your manipulation, you made it a conspiracy that goes far beyond family dysfunction. I played one more recording, this one capturing the coordination at the barbecue, as Patricia signaled to various people when to make undermining comments. The evidence was so clear and damning that even they couldn't deny what it revealed. When the recording ended, Ryan buried his face in his hands. Emma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. How far did you mean for it to go, Ryan? When you started this on our wedding night, what was your end game? Did you want me to have a complete mental breakdown? Did you want me to become so insecure that I would never leave you no matter how badly you treated me? Ryan's silence was answer enough. Patricia made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Emma, if we hurt you, we're truly sorry. But destroying this family won't undo what happened. Ryan loves you, and we can work through this together if you'll just give us a chance. Patricia, you spent 4 years systematically destroying my sense of self-worth. You recruited friends and family members to participate in your campaign. You made me question my own reality and convinced me that I was disgusting and unlovable. And your son not only participated enthusiastically, but he was the one who initiated it on our wedding night. I stood up, leaving the folder and my phone on the coffee table. I'm not interested in working through this together. I'm interested in making sure you both face consequences for what you've done. Ryan looked up at me with tears in his eyes. What are you going to do? I'm going to divorce you, obviously. No-fault divorce is easy in Oregon, but given the evidence I have of psychological abuse, I think I have grounds for a fault-based divorce that could affect property division and spousal support. Patricia gasped. Emma, please. Think about what you're doing. This will destroy Ryan's reputation, his career. People will never look at him the same way again. You're right, I said calmly. People probably won't look at him the same way once they know he spent 4 years psychologically torturing his wife. That's what consequences look like. I walked toward the front door, then turned back to face them one more time. I'm also going to share the recordings with some of the people who participated in your little campaign at the barbecue. I think they deserve to know what they were really doing when they made those helpful comments about my appearance and hygiene. Ryan jumped up from the couch. Emma, wait. Please. Can't we talk about this? Can't we find some way to work this out? There's nothing to work out, Ryan. You made your choice when you decided to torture me instead of love me. You made your choice when you enlisted your mother and your friends to help you do it. Now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. I opened the front door and stepped outside into the brilliant autumn sunshine. Behind me, I could hear Patricia crying and Ryan calling my name. But I didn't look back. I had spent 4 years looking back, second-guessing myself, wondering what I had done wrong, trying to fix problems that existed only in their twisted imagination. Now I was looking forward. The divorce papers were filed the following Tuesday. Rebecca had been right about the strength of my case. The recorded evidence of systematic psychological abuse was so compelling that Ryan's attorney recommended he agree to a settlement rather than risk the recordings being played in open court. Ryan tried calling me dozens of times in the weeks that followed, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations to desperate pleas for another chance. I never answered. There was nothing he could say that would change what he had done or make me trust him again. Patricia made her own attempts at reconciliation, showing up at my temporary apartment with flowers and carefully worded apologies that somehow managed to avoid taking real responsibility for her actions. I had the building manager inform her that she was no longer welcome on the property. The hardest part was dealing with the social fallout. When word got out about the divorce and the reasons behind it, reactions were mixed. Some people were horrified and immediately offered their support. Others seemed to think I was overreacting, or making too big a deal out of what they characterized as, quote, marital problems. A few of Ryan's friends who had participated in the barbecue manipulation reached out to apologize, claiming they hadn't understood what they were really doing. I accepted some of these apologies and rejected others, depending on how sincere they seemed, and how willing the person was to acknowledge their role in what had happened to me. The financial settlement was more generous than I had expected. In addition to my share of our marital assets, Ryan agreed to pay substantial spousal support and to cover the costs of the therapy I needed to recover from years of psychological abuse. Rebecca had been right that the documentation of systematic manipulation made a powerful case for damages. 6 months after I confronted them in Patricia's living room, I was living in a bright, airy apartment downtown with a view of the river and a sense of peace I hadn't felt since before my wedding day. I had started therapy with a specialist in recovering from psychological abuse, and I was slowly rebuilding my confidence and my sense of self. I also started volunteering with a local organization that supported women escaping abusive relationships. My experience with psychological manipulation turned out to be valuable in helping other women recognize the signs of emotional abuse and understand that the problems they thought they had were often manufactured by their abusers. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding. There's something powerful about being able to look another woman in the eye and say, I believe you. You're not crazy. You're not imagining it. And you can survive this. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ryan had struggled with the aftermath of our divorce. His reputation in our social circle was permanently damaged, and he had difficulty dating because word had gotten around about his psychological manipulation tactics. Patricia had apparently become something of a pariah in her own social circles once people understood her role in the systematic abuse of her daughter-in-law. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but I also felt no sympathy. They had made choices, and choices have consequences. They had chosen manipulation over honesty, cruelty over kindness, control over love. Now they were living with the results of those choices. 1 year after that confrontation, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. It was Ryan, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. He asked if we could talk, and despite my better judgment, I let him in. He had come to apologize, he said. Not to ask for forgiveness or to try to win me back, but simply to acknowledge the full scope of what he had done and to take responsibility for it. I've been in therapy, he told me as we sat across from each other in my living room. Real therapy. Not the kind where you just complain about your problems and expect sympathy. The kind where you have to face uncomfortable truths about yourself. I listened as he described the work he was doing to understand how he had become someone capable of systematic psychological abuse. He talked about his relationship with his mother, about patterns of manipulation he had learned in childhood, about his own insecurities that had driven him to tear down someone else in order to feel powerful. I know this doesn't fix anything, he said when he finished. I know I can't undo the damage I caused, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you, and I'm committed to making sure I never do anything like it again. It was the first genuine apology I had ever heard from him, and while it didn't change anything between us, it did provide a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. I appreciate you telling me this, I said when he was ready to leave. But I want you to understand something. The person you destroyed was someone who loved you completely and trusted you absolutely. You'll never get another chance to hurt her, because she doesn't exist anymore. The person I am now learned from what you did to her, and she's much harder to deceive. Ryan nodded, tears in his eyes. I know. I'm glad she's gone, actually. She deserved so much better than what I gave her. After he left, I stood at my window watching the sun set over the river and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 4 years of systematic psychological abuse had nearly destroyed me, but ultimately, it had also taught me things about myself that I might never have learned otherwise. I had learned that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I had learned that I could trust my own perceptions, even when everyone around me was telling me I was wrong. I had learned that love without respect wasn't love at all, and that someone who truly cared for me would never systematically work to destroy my confidence. Most importantly, I had learned that the truth really could set me free, but only if I was brave enough to seek it out and strong enough to act on it when I found it. The woman who had stood in Patricia's living room that Sunday morning, playing recordings that exposed years of carefully orchestrated lies, was someone Ryan and Patricia had never expected me to become. They had counted on my insecurity, my need for approval, my willingness to doubt my own reality rather than question theirs. But they had underestimated the power of truth and the strength that comes from finally understanding that you've been living a lie. They had given me the greatest gift they could have given me, though they never intended it as a gift. They had forced me to save myself. And I had. 2 years had passed since that Sunday morning confrontation in Patricia's pristine living room, and my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined during those dark years of manipulation and self-doubt. I was standing in the kitchen of my new home, a charming craftsman bungalow in southeast Portland that I had purchased entirely on my own, watching the morning light filter through windows that I had chosen, in a space that belonged completely to me. The house had been a wreck when I first saw it, with peeling paint, overgrown gardens, and rooms that hadn't been updated since the 1970s. But I had seen its potential immediately, the way the original hardwood floors gleamed beneath layers of dust, the way the built-in bookshelves in the living room begged to be filled with stories, the way the breakfast nook looked out onto a backyard that could become anything I wanted it to be. Renovating the house had been therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. Every decision I made about paint colors, light fixtures, and furniture was mine alone. There was no one questioning my choices, no one suggesting that my taste was impractical, or that I should choose something more conservative. For the first time in my adult life, I was creating a space that reflected who I truly was, rather than who someone else thought I should be. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. The first few months after the divorce had been some of the most difficult of my life, as I struggled to rebuild not just my living situation but my entire sense of identity. Years of psychological manipulation had left me uncertain about everything, from my own preferences to my ability to make basic decisions. I had to relearn how to trust my own judgment, how to recognize my own wants and needs, how to exist in the world as an individual, rather than as half of a toxic partnership. Therapy had been crucial to that process. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the trauma specialist I had started seeing, helped me understand the full extent of what Ryan and Patricia had done to me, and how their manipulation had affected every aspect of my life. She helped me recognize the patterns of abuse, understand how gaslighting worked, and develop strategies for rebuilding my confidence and self-worth. One of the most difficult revelations was understanding how deeply the abuse had affected my relationship with myself. Ryan and Patricia hadn't just convinced me that I had hygiene problems, they had systematically undermined my ability to trust my own perceptions about anything. I had learned to second-guess every instinct, to doubt every preference, to assume that my natural reactions were somehow wrong or inappropriate. Dr. Walsh described it as learned helplessness, a psychological condition where someone becomes so accustomed to having their agency undermined that they stop trying to assert control over their own life. It explained why I had stayed in the marriage for so long, why I had accepted their version of reality even when it contradicted my own experiences, why I had been so willing to believe that the problem was always with me rather than with them. Recovery meant not just recognizing what had been done to me, but actively working to reclaim my own voice and trust my own judgment. It meant learning to distinguish between legitimate criticism and manipulative undermining. It meant understanding that healthy relationships involved mutual respect and support, rather than one person constantly correcting or improving the other. The work was exhausting and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also liberating. Each session brought new insights and new tools for understanding myself and my relationships. Slowly, gradually, I began to remember who I had been before Ryan and Patricia started their campaign to remake me into their image of what I should be. My career had flourished during this period of personal growth. The confidence I gained from standing up to my abusers translated into professional assertiveness that I had never possessed before. I started speaking up in meetings, proposing new projects, and advocating for promotions and raises. My supervisors noticed the change immediately, and within 6 months of my divorce, I had been promoted to a senior position with a substantial salary increase. The financial independence that came with my career advancement was almost as healing as the therapy. For the first time since my marriage, I was supporting myself entirely, making my own financial decisions and building my own future. The settlement from the divorce had provided a solid foundation, but the money I earned through my own efforts felt different somehow, more meaningful and more secure. I had also started doing volunteer work with the Portland Coalition Against Domestic Violence, using my experience with psychological abuse to help other women recognize and escape similar situations. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply rewarding, and it gave me a sense of purpose that I had been missing during the years when my entire life revolved around trying to fix non-existent problems with myself. Many of the women I worked with had experienced physical abuse, but a surprising number had stories similar to mine, tales of partners or family members who had systematically undermined their confidence and reality through subtle manipulation and gaslighting. These women often felt like their experiences weren't real abuse because there were no visible bruises, no police reports, no dramatic incidents that clearly crossed the line into criminal behavior. I understood that feeling intimately. For years, I had minimized what Ryan and Patricia were doing to me because it didn't fit the stereotypical image of domestic abuse. There were no black eyes, no hospital visits, no neighbors calling the police. Instead, there was a slow, steady erosion of my sense of self that was almost impossible to name or describe to people who hadn't experienced it themselves. Working with other survivors helped me understand that psychological abuse was every bit as damaging as physical violence, sometimes more so because it was harder to identify and escape. Physical wounds heal. The damage done to someone's fundamental sense of reality and self-worth can take years to repair. One of the women I worked with, Maria, had been convinced by her husband that she was going crazy. He had moved her belongings, changed settings on her computer and phone, and then acted confused when she mentioned that things seemed different. He had recruited his family to express concern about her mental health, suggesting that she was becoming paranoid and delusional. By the time she reached out for help, She was genuinely unsure whether her perceptions of reality could be trusted. Another woman, Jennifer, had been systematically isolated from her friends and family by a partner who insisted that they didn't really care about her and were just being polite when they included her in their activities. He would find reasons to decline invitations on her behalf, create conflicts that made socializing difficult, and then comfort her when she felt lonely and disconnected from everyone in her life. These stories reminded me how fortunate I had been to discover the truth about my own situation when I did. If I hadn't found the courage to investigate Ryan and Patricia's claims about my hygiene problems, if I hadn't had the resources to gather evidence of their manipulation, I might have spent decades believing that something was fundamentally wrong with me. The volunteer work also connected me with a community of people who understood what I had been through without needing extensive explanations. There was something powerful about being in a room full of women who had all experienced different forms of manipulation and abuse, but who recognized the common patterns and effects. We could speak in shorthand about gaslighting, isolation tactics, and the process of rebuilding trust in our own judgment. It was through this volunteer work that I met David Chen, a social worker who specialized in helping men who had been victims of domestic abuse. David's story was different from mine but had similar themes of manipulation, control, and systematic undermining of self-worth. His ex-wife had convinced him that he was incompetent at basic life skills, that his friends found him annoying, and that he was lucky she was willing to stay with someone so fundamentally flawed. David and I started as friends, bonding over our shared experiences and our commitment to helping other abuse survivors. We understood each other in ways that would have been impossible for someone who hadn't lived through systematic psychological manipulation. We knew what it felt like to question your own reality, to have your confidence systematically destroyed, to rebuild your sense of self from scratch. Our friendship developed slowly and carefully, both of us aware of how damaged our ability to trust had been by our previous relationships. We spent months getting to know each other as individuals, learning about each other's interests, values, and goals without the pressure of romantic expectations. When our friendship eventually evolved into something deeper, it was based on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding that I had never experienced before. David never questioned my perceptions or suggested that my reactions were inappropriate. He never tried to change me or improve me or make me into someone different. He appreciated me exactly as I was, and he supported my continued growth and healing without trying to direct or control it. The contrast between my relationship with David and my marriage to Ryan was so stark that it sometimes felt like I was living in a different universe. David celebrated my successes instead of minimizing them. He encouraged my independence instead of trying to make me more dependent on him. He trusted my judgment instead of constantly second-guessing my decisions. More importantly, David understood that my healing was my own responsibility, and that no relationship, no matter how healthy, could undo the damage that had been done to me by Ryan and Patricia. He supported my therapy, respected my boundaries, and gave me the space I needed to continue working on myself. 3 years after my divorce, David and I moved in together, combining our households in a way that felt collaborative rather than controlling. We made decisions together about everything from furniture to finances, but neither of us felt compelled to override the other's preferences or impose our own vision of how things should be. Living with David taught me what a healthy relationship actually looked like. We disagreed sometimes, but our disagreements were about specific issues rather than fundamental questions about my worth or competence. When conflicts arose, we worked together to find solutions, rather than one person insisting that the other was wrong or unreasonable. The difference was profound and healing. I began to understand that the constant tension and self-doubt I had experienced during my marriage weren't normal relationship challenges, but symptoms of abuse. Healthy relationships, I learned, were supposed to make you feel more confident and secure, not less. Around this time, I received an unexpected phone call from someone I hadn't heard from in years. It was Sarah, Ryan's friend, who had hosted the barbecue where I had gathered so much evidence of their manipulation campaign. She called to tell me that she and Michael were getting divorced, and that the process had made her reflect on her own behavior during my marriage to Ryan. "I need to apologize to you," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "I participated in something terrible, and I didn't understand what I was doing at the time, but that doesn't excuse it." Sarah explained that after my divorce, she had started paying more attention to the dynamics in her own social circle and had begun to recognize patterns of manipulation and control that she had previously overlooked. Her own marriage, she realized, involved similar tactics to what Ryan and Patricia had used against me, though not as extreme or systematic. "Michael never convinced me I smelled bad," she said, "but he did convince me that I was too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding. He had me believing that all our problems were caused by my unrealistic expectations and my inability to appreciate how good I had it." The conversation was both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed that what had happened to me wasn't unique or unusual, that manipulative people often used similar tactics across different relationships. But it also made me sad to think about how many other women might be experiencing similar abuse without recognizing it or knowing how to escape it. Sarah's call motivated me to expand my volunteer work and advocacy efforts. I started writing about my experiences with psychological abuse, first in blog posts and then in articles for magazines and websites that focused on relationship health and domestic violence awareness. The response to my writing was overwhelming. Hundreds of women reached out to share their own stories of manipulation and gaslighting, many of them describing situations that were remarkably similar to what I had experienced. Some were still trapped in abusive relationships and seeking advice on how to escape. Others had already left but were struggling with the recovery process. I realized that there was a significant gap in public awareness about psychological abuse. Most people understood that hitting or screaming at a partner was wrong, but the subtler forms of emotional manipulation were often overlooked or dismissed as normal relationship conflicts. This realization led me to start speaking publicly about my experiences, first at local events and support groups, and eventually at conferences and workshops for professionals who worked with abuse survivors. The work was emotionally demanding, requiring me to revisit painful memories and expose intimate details of my life to strangers, but it felt important and meaningful in ways that my previous career never had. One of the most rewarding aspects of this advocacy work was hearing from women who had read my writing or attended my talks and had been inspired to examine their own relationships more critically. Some had discovered that they were being manipulated in ways they hadn't recognized. Others had found the courage to leave relationships that they now understood were abusive. A woman named Lisa contacted me after reading one of my articles, explaining that she had been convinced by her boyfriend that she was boring and socially awkward. He had gradually isolated her from her friends by making her believe that they found her annoying and only included her out of pity. Reading my story had helped her recognize these tactics as manipulation rather than truth, and she had ended the relationship and was working to rebuild her social connections. Another woman, Patricia, ironically sharing a name with my former mother-in-law, had been convinced by her husband that she was a terrible mother. He constantly criticized her parenting decisions, undermined her authority with their children, and made her feel incompetent and inadequate. My writing had helped her understand that good parents don't systematically destroy their partner's confidence in their parenting abilities. And she was now working with a therapist to rebuild her self-esteem and improve her relationship with her children. These stories reminded me why the work was so important. Psychological abuse thrived in darkness and silence, but when survivors shared their experiences openly, it became much easier for other people to recognize similar patterns in their own lives. 5 years after my divorce, I received news that I had been both expecting and dreading. Patricia had died of a heart attack at the age of 68. Ryan called to inform me, his voice flat and emotionless, as he delivered the news. "I thought you should know," he said. "I know she hurt you, but she was still part of your life for a long time." I thanked him for letting me know and offered my condolences, though my feelings about Patricia's death were complicated. I wasn't glad she was dead, but I also couldn't pretend to mourn someone who had dedicated so much energy to destroying my sense of self-worth. What surprised me was how little her death affected me emotionally. The woman who had once held so much power over my life had become irrelevant to my happiness and well-being. Her opinion of me no longer mattered because I had learned to trust my own judgment. Her approval was no longer something I craved because I had learned to approve of myself. The funeral was small and sparsely attended. Many of Patricia's former friends had distanced themselves from her after learning about her role in my abuse, and her social circle had shrunk considerably in her final years. I chose not to attend, but I sent flowers with a card that simply said, "For Ryan, with sympathy." A few weeks after the funeral, Ryan called again. He wanted to tell me that going through Patricia's belongings had been difficult and had brought up a lot of unresolved feelings about what they had done to me. I found a notebook, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. She had written down detailed plans for how to undermine your confidence. It was like a manual for psychological torture, Emma. Seeing it written out in her handwriting made me realize how calculated and deliberate everything was. I wasn't surprised by this revelation, but hearing about the notebook still made me feel slightly sick. The idea that Patricia had been organized and methodical in her cruelty was disturbing, even though I had always suspected that their manipulation had been planned rather than spontaneous. "What did you do with it?" I asked. "I burned it," Ryan said immediately. "I couldn't bear to have it in the house, and I couldn't risk anyone else ever seeing it, but I wanted you to know that it existed, because I think it proves how wrong we were about everything." I appreciated him telling me, though the information didn't change anything fundamental about how I viewed what had happened. Whether their abuse had been planned or impulsive, documented or informal, the damage had been the same. "I'm glad you told me," I said, "but I want you to know that I don't need any more proof of what you and your mother did to me. I figured that out a long time ago, and I've moved on with my life." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "I'm glad you moved on, I really am. You deserve to be happy." It was the most genuine thing he had ever said to me, and I found myself believing that he meant it. Our conversation ended cordially, and I realized that I had finally reached a point where I could interact with Ryan without anger or pain. He had become just another person from my past, someone who had played a role in my story but who no longer had any power over my present or future. That realization felt like the final step in my healing process. I had not only escaped the abuse and rebuilt my life, but I had reached a point where my abusers could no longer hurt me emotionally. Their opinions didn't matter to me, their presence didn't upset me, and their absence didn't bring me joy or relief because they had simply become irrelevant to my happiness. 6 years after my divorce, David proposed to me during a hiking trip in the Columbia River Gorge. We had been living together for 3 years, and our relationship had grown stronger and deeper with each passing month. Unlike my first marriage, which had been based on performance and pretense, my relationship with David was built on authenticity and mutual support. The proposal itself was simple and perfect, nothing like the elaborate production Ryan had orchestrated when he proposed to me in a restaurant full of strangers. David and I were sitting on a rocky outcrop overlooking the river, eating sandwiches and talking about our plans for the future, when he pulled out a simple but beautiful ring and asked if I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. "I love who you are," he said, "and I love who you're becoming. I want to support your dreams and share your adventures and grow old with someone who sees the world the way you do." It was everything a proposal should be: honest, heartfelt, and focused on the future rather than the performance. I said yes without hesitation, not because I needed marriage to feel complete, but because I wanted to make a formal commitment to building a life with someone who truly loved and respected me. Our wedding was small and intimate, held in the backyard of our house with close friends and family members who had supported us throughout our individual healing journeys and our relationship together. My sister Lauren was my maid of honor, and David's brother was his best man. We wrote our own vows, promising to support each other's independence as well as our partnership, to communicate honestly even when it was difficult, and to never use love as a weapon or a tool for control. The contrast between this wedding and my first one was stark and meaningful. My first wedding had been a performance designed to impress other people and create the appearance of a perfect relationship. This wedding was a celebration of two people who had found each other after surviving significant trauma and who were committed to building something healthy and sustainable together. The reception was held in our living room, with food prepared by friends and music played on David's old stereo system. It was informal and joyful, full of laughter and genuine conversation rather than polite small talk and social posturing. I felt more beautiful and more loved than I had ever felt in my life, not because of my dress or my makeup or the approval of others, but because I was surrounded by people who truly cared about my happiness and well-being. As I looked around the room at the faces of people who had supported me through my darkest period and celebrated my recovery, I realized that this was what love actually looked like. It wasn't about control or improvement or making someone into what you thought they should be. It was about acceptance, support, and the choice to build something beautiful together while remaining true to yourselves as individuals. The years that followed were filled with the kind of ordinary happiness that I had never experienced during my first marriage. David and I traveled together, renovated our house together, adopted a rescue dog named Luna who brought us daily joy and occasional chaos. We both continued our work with abuse survivors, sometimes collaborating on projects and sometimes pursuing our own individual interests in the field. I published a book about my experiences with psychological abuse, which became a resource for other survivors and the professionals who worked with them. The book tour was emotionally challenging but deeply rewarding, as I met hundreds of people who had been helped by my story and who shared their own experiences of manipulation and recovery. David started a nonprofit organization that provided support services specifically for male victims of domestic abuse, a population that was often overlooked by traditional services. His work helped change the conversation around domestic violence and made it easier for men to seek help when they were being abused by partners or family members. Together, we created a life that was meaningful and fulfilling in ways that my previous existence had never been. We faced challenges and difficulties like any couple, but we faced them as partners rather than adversaries. When disagreements arose, we worked together to find solutions rather than trying to prove who was right or wrong. When one of us struggled with something, the other provided support without trying to take control or impose their own solutions. Most importantly, we both continued to grow and change as individuals while supporting each other's development. David encouraged my writing and speaking career even when it meant spending time apart for travel and events. I supported his nonprofit work even when it required long hours and emotional investment that left less time for us as a couple. This balance between individual growth and partnership was something I had never experienced before, and it made me understand how much I had lost during those years when my entire identity had been subsumed into trying to be what Ryan and Patricia wanted me to be. Looking back now, more than a decade after that Sunday morning confrontation in Patricia's living room, I can see that the abuse I experienced was both the worst thing that ever happened to me and, paradoxically, one of the most important experiences of my life. It was devastating and traumatic and should never have occurred, but it also taught me lessons about myself, about relationships, and about resilience that I might never have learned otherwise. I learned that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, capable of not just surviving systematic psychological torture, but of fighting back strategically and effectively. I learned that my perceptions and instincts were reliable, even when everyone around me was telling me they were wrong. I learned that love without respect was not love at all, and that healthy relationships were supposed to build you up rather than tear you down. Most importantly, I learned that recovery was possible, that the damage done by psychological abuse could be healed, and that it was never too late to reclaim your life and build something better. The woman who sits in her kitchen now, watching the morning light stream through windows she chose in a house she bought with money she earned, is someone Ryan and Patricia never could have imagined I would become. They saw me as weak, malleable, easily controlled. They never anticipated that their abuse would ultimately make me stronger, more self-aware, and more determined to live authentically. Their greatest mistake was underestimating my capacity for growth and change. They thought they could mold me into someone who would always need their approval and validation. Instead, they created someone who learned to trust herself completely and who dedicated her life to helping others escape similar situations. In the end, their attempt to destroy me became the foundation for the most meaningful and fulfilling life I could have imagined. That's not justice in the traditional sense, but it's something even better. It's proof that love, truth, and resilience can triumph over manipulation, lies, and cruelty. And that's a lesson worth sharing with anyone who has ever been told they are not enough, who has ever been made to doubt their own reality, who has ever believed that they deserve to be treated as less than fully human. You are stronger than you know, your perceptions are valid, and you deserve to be loved for exactly who you are. The truth really can set you free, but only if you're brave enough to seek it and strong enough to act on it when you find it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.